everybody. My name is Dolin, and for the last 25 years, my team of tutors, executive function coaches, and college consultants have been helping kids to do better in school and to get into the college of their choice. Now, here's the thing. We all want our kids to finish the year strong. But at this time of the year, especially when it comes to being organized and planning time, everybody's tired. Parents, they just want the year to be over. And so do kids. We call this time of the year the spring slump. And it's for good reason. Now, there's nobody better to talk about this topic with me today than Kathi Gould. And I would love for you to meet Kathi. Kathi is an executive function specialist here at Educational Connections. She's a program manager, which means every day she talks to parents about issues that their kids are having when it comes to ADHD, executive function, or just motivation in general. So Kathi was a Connecticut public school teacher for 27 years. And she taught kids from elementary to high school as a teacher and a tutor. And as an executive function coach, she worked with kids as young as 7 all the way up through adulthood. And she has an M.Ed, a master's in education, and a 6th year in leadership education. Not only that, Kathi has real world experience. She is a parent of a young adult with ADHD. So Kathi, welcome. Glad you're here today.
Thanks, Anne. It's great to be here.
You know, I know that you talk to parents all the time. I'm curious, when it comes to younger students or elementary school students, what are some things that parents are saying?
Yeah, I do talk to parents all day and I hear all sorts of things. But if I had to pick out the most common, the items are on the screen. So things like parents are telling me my child is having social issues or problem with peers. My child is messy. His desk is a mess. His room is a mess. He can't sit still at home or at school. He's spacey, staring out the window. The teacher said he's not listening. He's super verbal, but he can't get his ideas on paper. He doesn't even know basic math facts. Teachers are saying he's being disruptive in class. And the last one is that anxiety piece then. With all of this negative feedback, the anxiety piece starts to creep in, and that's making our younger students less positive and less engaged in school.
How about older students? What are parents saying about middle and high school kids?
It's very similar, and we've just sort of upped it a notch, right? So parents are on the phone with me. I've had parents so anxious, actually parents in tears. They're so frustrated with what's happening. Their kids are completely overwhelmed. They have missing multiple assignments, sometimes 10 to 15 assignments behind. Their lockers are a mess. Their rooms are a mess. They can't organize their binders. They wait till the last minute, so they procrastinate before starting anything. They're super resistant to help from their parents. I have yet to have a parent come on the phone and say, oh my gosh, my child loves working with me, right? It just doesn't happen that way. Their grades are dropping. They're having problems with writing. And eventually what happens with all of this is we start to see skill gaps, because as they start to disengage, they're missing content. And then that also causes a negative environment for them. And, you know, with older kids, we start to worry about how that's going to manifest, what kind of choices or behaviors are going to come up as a result.
Kathi, I'm sure when you're hearing all these things, parents are worried that maybe it's just a plain old motivation issue. Perhaps their child is lazy. Maybe they're just not cut out for school, or they just don't like school. But all of these things really tie into executive functions.
Yeah, they really do. And all the things on the previous 2 screens are manifestations of a lack of executive function skills, right? And executive function skills are those mental processes that we need to be successful in academics and, quite frankly, in life. So all these things like goal setting and organizing and shifting flexibly from one activity to another, being able to access one's working memory, whether it's reading a novel or computing math problems, and self-checking. And I love this image, Anne, that we have, because, you know, you can picture all of these gears winding together. And when they're working well, they all work in collaboration and things go smoothly.
But sometimes they get stuck. What happens when a gear gets stuck, Kathi?
Yeah. When a gear gets stuck, and you can just picture, you can hear the grinding right in this image right here. So this is when we have an issue, and you can see they're all interrelated. So if one thing stops working, everything, there's an impact on everything. I always like to use the analogy of the air traffic controller, right? When the air traffic controller is doing his or her thing, what should be chaos works masterfully. When one plane comes in from the wrong direction or tries to land on the wrong runway, we have mayhem. And that's what happens when a student has trouble with executive function skills, and it makes it really difficult for them to access curriculum.
On the other hand, Kathi, what happens when all the gears are working just fine?
Yeah, well, that's what we hope for, right? So when everything is working together, school achievement improves. So grades go up, participation goes up. And along with that, the students' confidence increases and that negative feeling starts to go away, and they're much more willing to engage. Their negative behaviors are reduced, so they stop, they're not feeling defensive. They stop withdrawing. They stop being defensive and saying, I don't need help from you. And once they start to learn what's been going on with them and learning tools for handling all this stress, their emotional and physical health improves as well.
So we now know a little bit about all those cogs in the wheel. But what can parents do on their end to help kids that might be stuck somewhere along the way?
Yeah, there are a lot of things for parents to take to handle on their own. And one of them is just to have a conversation with your child, right? And you have a great phrase that you've said to us before that I want you to share with everyone. When you talk about that phrase you use when you say, I noticed. Tell our viewers about that.
Sure. I mean, I really like that phrase, Kathi. Like, I've noticed school work is hard this year, or I noticed math is particularly difficult. It just feels a lot better to kids than you're missing 5 math assignments, or why are you waiting until the last minute? You can do better than this. You're smarter than this. Those types of things put kids on the defensive. But if you're just kind of like curious and you're just noticing a behavior, it's just that you're observing something, and that feels way more collaborative to kids. So I've had a lot of good luck using that statement, using those words with kids over the years. And ultimately, when we have a conversation as parents with our kids, we don't want to, corner them or, really make them lash back out at us because they're upset. Really, the goal of a conversation when you're addressing an issue is just to let your child talk. And so your goal as a parent initially is just to be a good listener. Have you found that to be the case, Kathi, with your kids, with your students?
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think that whole approach validates for the child what they're feeling in a very non-confrontational way, helps the child feel safe, helps the child feel heard. And then that just buys you so much more runway, right? To move ahead. I love that plan.
For sure. And, one of the issues that we often see with kids and talking to them about their issues is that organization is a big cog. It's a cog in the wheel that if it's hard for you, it affects everything. So I'd love to talk a little bit about organization, Kathi. Tell us, well, actually, before I bring you in, I just have to share this with you. It's so funny, but kind of sad. I was on a training a couple of weeks ago for an executive function program, and what I learned is that there's a big disconnect. Teachers that rated executive function skills of students said that organization is their number one skill that kids have to have, whereas kids rated that skill as not that important. So it's interesting. There's such a disconnect. But what's also interesting is that one of the teachers in the training with me said, I asked one of my students, what does organization mean to you? And the kid says, it's when everybody yells at me. And isn't that the saddest? I mean,
that's terrible.
It is terrible because, again, to the point, we know it's important, but kids are really stymied by it. Let's talk, Kathi, a little bit about why that occurs and what can we do as adults to help kids with this issue of organization.
Yeah, I think, and it's so hard to go back and think to when we were elementary school age or middle school age. And I think as adults, we just assume that if we say you need to get organized, that students know what we're talking about. And I remember, way back at the beginning when I was starting out as a teacher, I made assumptions about what my kids could do. And I would say, well, organize your binder. And I just thought they knew what that meant. They don't. And so as parents, as teachers, as coaches, we need to model that for them. We need to show them, what does a nice organized desk look like? What materials do you need? Do you have the proper lighting? Do you have your computer set up? Do you have all the school materials that you might need?
It is a good point about assumptions. And I'll go to the next bullet here about a visual. When I was a teacher, I noticed that I would say to kids, clean out your backpack or clean out your desk. And they would kind of like move things around, but they didn't really know what organization was. And so this was back when I taught sixth grade. I said, okay, you can organize your desk one of two ways, or you can come up with your own way. One of them was big things on the bottom, smaller on top, or language arts on the left and math and science on the right. And once they had it organized to the point that they liked it, I had a little Polaroid camera in my room, and I took a picture of it in an organized way, and I gave it to the student, and they kept that picture at the bottom of their desk. And I know it seems like overkill, like kids should know how to do this, but often they don't. So as parents, when we say go clean your room, our definition of clean might be completely different than theirs. And so it's another way of saying, okay, what does clean mean to you? Maybe it's just three things: no clothes on the floor, no food in your room, and everything in your hamper, dirty clothes in your hamper. So
Yeah.
being really specific with kids. And as coaches, we have to do the same thing with things like their digital organization or their backpack. So Kathi, I know you're a fan of really picking your battles. Why is that important when it comes to these things?
Well, and you just alluded to it, even with your classroom saying, you said you can try this, or you can come up with a system of your own. This is what our coaches do a lot with anything, with any executive functions, whether it's planning or organization. They'll say, here's a couple of strategies. I'm going to walk you through them. I'm not going to tell you which one you have to pick, but you do have to pick one of them, right? So it becomes a sort of a collaborative relationship with the student. It also gives the student a little bit of autonomy and ownership. So it makes them feel like they're part of the process instead of that the process is being done to them. And with regard to things like organization, I like the pick your battles. And we're going to talk about on the next screen sort of a template that our coaches use, or a way that you could frame a conversation with your child. So this one is actually something from a curriculum that we use, and it's called Design at Help My Focus Space. And again, as a parent, you could just have this conversation with your child, or this is a template that our coaches use. But you ask the student, in the left side of the Venn diagram, put those things that help you focus. So is it total silence, or is it music, or is it having a fidget or something in your hand, right? And then the other side of the Venn diagram, what hurts your focus? And as a parent, if the student puts helps my focus, loud music, we might say, oh, come on. Is that really going to help you? But that's where we have to pick our battles, right? And let them try it. Let them try it out. And then, then have a nice, honest conversation after and say, okay, how did that go? With the speaker blaring and the walls shaking, did that work for you? And maybe it does. But that's where we have to work with them to come up with something that helps them, but they also feel like they had a little bit of say in.
I like that a lot, Kathi, when it's designed by the student, because that's when it always works best.
Right.
So, one of the things that we want kids to do is obviously have an organized space from which to work, but also to be able to plan ahead. We often think of organization as just things or stuff, but organization also can be time. So let's talk a little bit about the idea that Sunday is like that kickoff day for your week where you can plan ahead. And one of the ways we can do this is having a conversation around family dinners, or that one night, even if it's one night that you have dinner, this is really an ideal night. Why do you like Sundays as that kickoff night?
Oh, I remember when both of my boys were doing their thing in school and varsity sports. And I used to joke that I was held hostage by our baseball coach because there was just no predictability whatsoever. But Sundays, we held firm. And that's a time for everyone to sit down It's an effort where you look at the week ahead and see what everyone has to do, not just student assignments, but who's got a game, who's got a practice, who's babysitting and needs a ride over to so-and-so's house at 6 o'clock on Wednesday. But I love the idea because it really centers the family, and you also model for your kids what that looks like to work together and to plan something out 5 days in advance.
Yeah, so getting organized for the week is a great idea, Kathi. I did that with my own kids when they were younger, and I went over to my son's apartment a couple of weeks ago, and he has this big whiteboard in his kitchen. I said, "Oh, what's on here?" And he's like, "Oh, this is how I'm planning out my week." And I just thought that was great because all those years I thought, oh, he's not really listening to me, but they do. And that type of routine creates habits later on. So why is this so important? Why does planning not only help with the family dynamic and everything you've got to do, but why does it help with academics?
Well, I think specifically right now, academics is changing. It's obviously always changing, but so much more of the curriculum now are these projects, long-term projects. So it used to be, you'd get handed a worksheet, you'd start it, you'd finish it, and you'd turn it in. Now students are working on things that take weeks to do. If you have executive function skill issues, that's a nightmare for you, right? Something with no deadline, some big, huge project that's not broken into manageable pieces. So anytime we can help students with sort of punctuating a long-term event like that, it's going to help them with their academics.
That's a good point. I know when I was a teacher, it was more like, okay, I'm assigning this, it's due the next day, or it's due 2 days later. And those project-based things were kind of like nice to haves. They were like added on. But now that is the vast majority of the curriculum, and it really does impact kids with executive function issues because there's so many moving pieces. So Kathi, when parents call us, they're really looking for answers. Tell us about your conversations and what that looks like.
Yeah, I actually love this graphic too, Anne, because, it's random letters and numbers and notes. And then once they get some kind of intervention, coaching, help from a teacher, whatever it is, it funnels into words and equations and melodies. And that's what we want to do, right? So we want to take all of that chaos and help the parents to turn it into something that's workable, that works for everyone and that is effective.
Right. And at this time of year, it is crunch season. We talked about that spring slump. And, on one hand, it's kind of like a balancing act. You want to teach those really important executive functions, all those cogs in the wheel. But the reality is that kids have a lot of work. Teachers are assigning a lot of group projects, a lot of tests, because they need to put grades in their grade book. So it kind of becomes, how do you do a little bit of both during the school year? How do you find that balancing act? And, you can still teach you can teach those skills through the curriculum, but you can also use the summer in a different capacity. It's kind of like a bridge.
Yeah, I love this picture. So to me, it is exactly a bridge. So if you can do some kind of coaching or assistance over the summer, it creates a bridge from the end of one school year to the beginning of the next, right? And that does a couple of things. You can use it for remediation or enrichment, so you can close skill gaps. You can prevent that dreaded summer slide where students seem to forget everything they learned the year before, right? It helps them stay in some kind of schedule. And we're not saying, rigorous and intense like the school year, but something that, has a structure to it. And it makes the transition in the August or September so much easier for everyone involved.
Yeah, there's a lot of research, as many listeners know, about the summer slide. And if kids do absolutely nothing, they can lose about 3 months in math and about 2.5 months in language arts. So we don't want that to happen. So it can be a nice balance of, making sure there's a little bit of academics, but you're also teaching those executive functions. Personally, I love teaching executive functions in the summer because there is just a whole lot less pressure. There's not, okay, this is due, or I have that baseball practice, or I need to meet with this study group. It's just like a little bit, less pressure. Schedules are open. there aren't assignments that feel overwhelming. It just feels a little bit more doable. What do you see on your end?
I absolutely agree. And I think to all the conversations I have with parents when they've called us and said, we really need some support and assistance. And sometimes it's such a jigsaw puzzle just trying to figure out when they're going to fit this in during the school year because their kids are so busy. And we make it work, but it's hard, right? And the summer is so much easier and everyone's schedules are more open. You can do it in the morning, you can do it in the evening. And you're not fighting all of those other things. And I feel like the students are really receptive to it in the summer because they're more relaxed, right? And they don't feel like oh my gosh, it's someone else asking me to do something, right? Students find that they get a lot out of the summer sessions.
So to give you kind of an overview on what we do, we provide students with a research-based curriculum that is super engaging. It's a lot of fun. It's really interactive, and the sessions are customized to each student based on an assessment and determining what executive function skills they need to learn over the summer, or it can start in the school year so that they're really targeted. It's not just everybody gets the same thing. It's a little bit different for each child. Kathi, can you talk a little bit about the modules and the structure?
Yeah, so this is a fantastic curriculum. And I like that you talked about the modules. So it is modular, meaning it doesn't have to go in a specific order. So it's not like a scope and sequence that has to start in one place and end in another. And it covers all executive function skills, but the modules are broken into units. So one is cognitive flexibility, one is organization, one is self-monitoring. And so the coach, through knowing the child, talking to the parent, knows which ones are probably the most problematic for the student. And then those are the ones on which they work. And, a lesson could be anywhere from like a 20-minute lesson that's part of a bigger session, or two 20-minute lessons within a session, but they're customizable. So the coach can change up a lot of it is through PowerPoints, interactive PowerPoints that we use. The coach can change up even the reading comprehension level on the PowerPoint so that any student can engage with it. A coach can bring in, let's say they're working on note-taking skills and a student is really interested in, astronomy. So the coach can use an astronomy piece as the text through which they practice the skills. So it's super customizable and personal for each student.
So let's show a couple of examples when it comes to organization and planning.
Yeah. So this is what I love. This is an elementary level. So we do have two. We have an elementary based curriculum and we have it secondary based. This would be an example of an elementary lesson. And this one is talking about strategy. And this reminds me of our previous slide about organization when we were saying don't assume anything. You might use the word strategy with the third or fourth grader and think they know what you mean. They probably don't. So in this lesson, they talk about what is a strategy. Let's define it. Let's talk about it. And then this is a quick example of, this might be a slide that a coach would pull up. It's bright, it's colorful, it's exciting to look at, right? It's like the I Spy books. And the idea is that they say to the student, go ahead and find the items that are listed. And they don't give a lot of direction at the beginning. Maybe the student spends, 6-7 minutes trying to look. And then the coach might say, okay, what did you find? And maybe they have found 3 items. Then the coach will say to them, well, how did you find those? Or what was helpful to you? Or what was your strategy or your plan? And then the student might say, well, I crossed off the items as I saw them on the list, or I used my annotation tool and I circled them on the screen, or I looked first for bright colors, etc. Or the student might say, I don't know, I didn't have a plan. So then the student and the coach are going to talk about, well, what might work? Well, what would happen if you tried X? Then let them do it again and then have that conversation of, wow, was it more successful this time when you had this strategy? And then sort of the last step of that is taking it to a real life example. So I was working with a little guy several weeks ago, and we were talking about this, and he has just learned to rollerblade. And so we talked about the strategy, and I said, now that he knew what it meant, well, what was your strategy? And so he started to talk about the fact that he knew he needed to practice and that once a week wasn't enough, and that he set aside a time every day to do it. So it was a really nice transition from what is it, modeling it, letting them try it, and then relating it to his own life or a student's own life.
I love that. And I think even as parents, we can talk in language like strategies or how might you get started or what would be the first step. All those things are good cues for kids,
Yeah,
to start thinking more systematically instead of like just going to do something. Because
definitely.
kids with ADHD, they don't, we also always think like they don't check their work, they don't follow directions. And it's really because they don't have a strategy behind it and they don't think sequentially. Sequencing is really hard for
Yeah.
kids. So this helps them to be better sequencers. Okay, so let's give an example of older students.
Okay. So this would be something that is part of the curriculum for an older student. So maybe they're working on organization. So they're working on note-taking skills, right? So instead of just writing down everything that the teacher says, how can you distill it to the information that's important? So this is a simple 3-column template. What's the topic? What are some details about it? And then the part that makes this fun is in the right-hand column, you have a mnemonic device, right? So that's what triggers the memory. So that is a specific strategy that a coach can teach a student. So for example, the first one, igneous rocks. Okay, the detail is they're formed by cooling lava. The mnemonic is lava is so ignorant. So you hear that same root, the igneous and the ignorant, helps you remember it. If you skip down, for example, to sedimentary rock, we get the definition. And then the mnemonic is a small stone said, I'm Terry, right? So small and Terry, again, now you're relating the suffix to sedimentary and the name Terry. So just little quick, easy strategies and tools, but it's fun. And this is what helps kids remember information.
I love that, Kathi. Thank you.
Sure.
Ultimately, we want kids to really come up with their own strategy, and that always works better than telling kids what to do, which may sometimes work in the moment, but there's not a lot of carryover later on.
Right. And this goes back again to when we were saying earlier, pick your battles, right? So this is a strategy that the coaches will use. It's called the 4C strategy, and it stands for clean, customize, categorize, and continue. This is sort of an overarching approach. And again, when you have that alliteration of the repeated sound, it helps you remember, right? The 4Cs. And once the student internalizes this in a broad sense, they can take it to something more specific. But so this might be, you're going to clean up your desk. You're going to customize it. So you're going to organize your materials the way you want them. You're going to put them into categories that make sense to you. And you're going to continue to do this on a regular basis.
Speaking about organization and desks, what about backpacks and laptops and all the other things that we need to organize?
So important, right? We've all seen that. Oh my gosh. First of all, the backpacks sometimes are bigger than the student. When I taught middle school and I had, students who were less than 5 feet tall and they'd come in being pulled over backwards and like the weight of this backpack that was just bursting at the seams. So this is a fun way that's part of the coaching in the summer that the coaches will do with the kids. So if it's an elementary student, they might start with a backpack. And they might say, okay, pull out that backpack and I'm going to time you and see how long it takes you to find a pencil or to find your homework notebook or your math folder, whatever it is. And the student digs, and parents, this, you could be up to your shoulder in a backpack and still not be able to find something, right? So the coach might time them and then say, okay, now stop. Now, what if we clean it and customize it so you do it the way you want it, right? Put things in the appropriate categories, and then let's try the game again. So the student dumps everything out, throws out the garbage, puts the pencils in the pocket, puts the calculator where they want it, etc. Then when the coach says, okay, now find X, it happens in 5 seconds. So the student, it's a real life, experience of, wow, this actually works. With older kids, you might do it with a computer. So you might start and you're going to scare them, start them cold. Okay, open up your computer and find the rough draft of your English essay. And I'm going to time you. And they're going to look at you and say, and then if you've ever seen a kid's drive that's disorganized and everything says untitled document and they're clicking on every single one. So you say, find the rubric for your science project. Time them, etc. Then again, you go back and you have that conversation and you go through the clean. So clean out your files, customize. How do you want your drive organized? Categorize things the way that makes sense to you. And then let's try again and see how much faster it goes.
I like that a lot, Kathi, because it's so true. Untitled, kids really struggle with that.
Yeah.
When we showed that image of the gears in motion for executive functions, one of the last gear was called self-reflection. And it's really metacognition, your ability to think to yourself, is this working for me? How is this going? And it's interesting because your executive functions are in the frontal lobe of your brain, right behind your forehead. And as your brain develops bottom to front, they're the last part of the brain to come online.
Yeah.
And with executive functions, this metacognition is really the hardest skill for kids. So when we say to kids, what would you do? What did you do wrong? Or what was the problem? They have a hard time figuring that out because depending on their age, they may really not know. So it's really this reflection piece in this discussion around, how did it go for you? That is so, so important. And ultimately, that is the secret to long-term growth with executive functions, with success in school, is your ability to self-monitor. And we often think that your ability to self-monitor is an academic thing or a workplace thing, but it really isn't just for kids or for school. Even the Navy SEALs use, this, you want to know what worked well. And after an action or an activity or something that they've engaged in, they have something called an after action report. And the after action report is really these three questions. How did it go? Why? And what would you do differently next time? And it's really that same exact thing as it is for Navy SEALs as it is for kids. How did that strategy go? Why did it work or why did it not work? And instead of, well, how would you fix it? We don't care about the past anymore. The past is gone. It doesn't really matter. All you can do is take that information you've learned and apply it to the future. So a better question, instead of, what did you do wrong as a parent would, what would you do differently next time? Yeah. So this reflection is so, so important, Kathi. What does that look like in terms of when coaches use a strategy with kids?
Yeah, I can't agree with you more, Anne. And it's important at all stages of our lives. And you and I were just in a meeting together yesterday where we sort of ran through a reflection of, an event that had occurred, and we all talked about what would we do differently next time. So it's something that we always use, right? With the curriculum that we use, this would be an example of an elementary type reflection. And every one of those lessons within the modules has different reflection sheets, but this is an example of one. So let's say if you go back to that I Spy picture and the student said, the strategy was marking off the items as they appeared. You ask the student, how did your plan go? And then the student himself or herself is going to rate it. Either I like it, I'm not sure, I don't like it. And then why did you pick that rating? Well, if it went well, it saved me time, or it took too much time, or I got a better grade on something, I got a worse grade. So just a very honest reflection of what happened. And then the final step is, okay, next time. So if it went well, they're going to say, yeah, I'll use that strategy. And that's a win, right? Now they have something that they can use, something in their toolkit. Or you know what? I'm still looking around. So next time I'm going to try out something different.
And then how about this one for older students?
Yeah, so it's the same idea, but obviously we're leveling up a little bit. So in an older student, we're going to talk about, select a strategy to help you get started. So maybe they say, I'm going to break down a large task into parts or something like that. And then why do you think this strategy is going to be helpful? And the coach and the student, again, this is interactive. So they're working on this document on an interactive whiteboard. The student is marking it up as they talk about it, and they come up with the reasons why they think it'll be helpful. Then the activity occurs. And then on a continuum, and I love continuums because they show growth, right? So how did your plan go? And rate the strategy. So from I didn't like it at all to, wow, it worked really well and I liked using it. And then the same question, why did you pick this rating? And then next time, will you use it or will you choose something different?
I like rating systems a lot. They're easy for kids. If you say, how did you feel about this? Or how did it go for you? It's, or something really global. It's a little bit harder than how would you rate this? Because that feels a little bit more objective.
And this is more concrete.
Yeah, it's a little bit more concrete. I totally agree with that. Yeah. So really, everything works together when it comes to executive functions, from starting out with, okay, what am I going to do? What do I need to get done? What are the three things? That's kind of like your goal setting. Your flexibility, and when it doesn't quite go right, can you shift gears, or can you stay organized? Can you access your working memory? And then that last part we just talked about is self-checking, that metacognitive strategy and looking towards the future. So if we can help you get your child's gears in motion, we're happy to. Kathi can absolutely set up a call with you. You can scan this QR code with your phone, and that will bring you to her calendar, and you can talk to Kathi about your student. So I would love to go to Q&A right now. If you have a question, we will answer it. And then after we do Q&As, a survey will pop up on your screen. And if you would be so kind as to take that survey to let us know what you liked about this presentation and how we can improve for next time, that would be so incredibly helpful to us. All right, Kathi, are you ready to go
Sure.
to the Q&A?
Yeah.
All right. So actually, the chat, let me take that back. Put any question in the chat. That would be terrific. So Kathi, if it's okay, I'm going to go back and to the parents' issues. When they first came in, I said, what's keeping you up at night? What are some of the issues that we're experiencing? And start out with those, and then we'll go to the questions.
Sure.
So Andrew said, the planning issue is really hard for his student, that there are a lot of late nights. And I'm wondering if you can comment on, a way that you found that works for kids to maybe move things back to start a little bit earlier.
Yeah, so that's a big one. And that ties in with time management and not being aware of how much time things take. So a quick strategy that I like is when we do like a 3-column template and we say, what is the step? So what do you have to do? How much time do you think it's going to take you? And when are you going to do it? So it's not a to-do list, because we all know a to-do list could be, I can do it today or I can do it in July, right? It's here's the activity. This is how much time it's going to take me. And this is when I'm planning to do it. And I make the kids be specific, like Monday from 7 to 7:30. So not only does this help them map it out, but it also over time, they start to understand how much time things really take. And this is such a great tool because if you get this on screen or on paper, the coach can go back to the student after and say, okay, so you said your reading entry was going to be 30 minutes and you were going to do it, from 7 to 7:30 on Wednesday. How'd that go? And the student might say, oh my God, it took me an hour and a half. And then the coach is, oh, let's talk about that. And then they talk about what got in the way, what they can do differently next time. So it all ties together really well to help with that long-term kind of, block.
Yeah, I like that idea of really helping kids to plan out what they're going to do and help them to be better estimators of time, because they often overestimate how much time they have, and then they underestimate how much time it's going to take them to do something.
Sure.
I'd also say to Andrew's statement or question, how do you get them to start earlier or get them done on time, is often we think of the end time as parents, like, oh, you need to be done by 10 p.m. or 11 o'clock. And instead, we can actually think of the start time. Okay, instead of what often happens with older kids is they just naturally want to stay up later. So they'll push all their work to later. They'll start at like 9. But if we could help them get in the habit of starting a little bit earlier, even after dinner. So maybe you can ask the questions, what do you have and when will you do it? Is that something that could be started after dinner? And really encouraging kids to start earlier, that just kind of naturally backs things up. All right, so let's look at the next question we have in the chat. So a lot of people said issues on time management, which we just talked about. And then Julia asked, what about focusing on the task until it's finished? Kathi, how have you helped kids in that way?
Yeah. Again, these are all common things and can be super frustrating, right? So there are a number of different things that you can do for focusing on a task. One of them is removing distractions from the area, right? So get brothers and sisters out of the room, get the phone out of the room if possible, noise canceling headphones, whatever it takes. Also, a very common kind of trick of the trade is what we call the Pomodoro method. So you have a timer, and there's actually like one that looks like a big red Pomodoro tomato that you can buy that's very visual. And you set it for 25 minutes. So the student has to work for 25 minutes. Then they get a 5-minute break, and they know they're getting that break. Then they come back to the table, they set it again, they get another break. So that way they know they only have to work for X number of minutes. And most kids at least can build up to a 25-minute session of work. And it provides that, brain break. I would say to students during that 5-minute break, get up, walk around, run up and down the stairs, do something, because that really helps with the, those endorphins that help us to focus. And then there are also a number of digital tools they can use. There's a number of apps, and the kids are all super tech savvy, obviously. So there are some on the phone that they can use. There's one called Forest that they commit to not touching the phone for a certain period of time. And if they succeed, they grow a tree. And over time, they grow forests, and they can compete with their friends. So it becomes gamified, which kids love. And actually, that one I love because if they do it correctly, they actually earn coins that become real money that they can send to places that need to be reforested. So if you have a, environmentally minded child, forest might be a good one for them.
I like Forest too. And you're right. It's super popular with kids. That is a great one for helping students to kind of manage. It kind of goes back to that self-awareness and modulating your emotions. And, when you really don't want to do something, having some type of external source to help you, like Forest, or to your point, a timer. If you don't have that internal oomph to get started or to sustain attention, those external sources can help you. So Kathi, one parent asked, what about just getting started, especially when things feel overwhelming? How have you found success with that skill?
So I think the root of that one, like the task initiation piece, is what's stopping you? And I think we have to get to that first. So for some kids, it's perfectionism. They're like, if I can't do it exactly this way, I'm not going to do it at all. Therefore, I can't start. Some don't have the resources that they need. They don't have the materials. They forgot to bring the things home from school. They don't have the template. They don't have the rubric, or they don't have the content knowledge. So they don't even know where to start. The task is so big, it's overwhelming, and they're terrified. So a super quick, easy thing that I used to do with students and our coaches will do is, let's take that big, huge, overwhelming project and let's break it into manageable pieces. Because anybody can start for 5 minutes on something, right? So let's say that it's a big essay and they haven't started it, and we're going to say, okay, let's just work on a graphic organizer. Let's spend 5 or 8 minutes. We're just going to do that, and then we're going to put that to bed. And then the next day, now we're just going to do the intro paragraph. So if you can take something that looks like this to a kid and break it into very manageable pieces, you can train them over time. Come on, anybody can do this for 5 minutes. I'm going to be with you. We're going to do it together. And then the next time is, let's see if we can go for 10 minutes. But once you sort of break through that initial barrier, it becomes a lot easier and the students gain traction.
Sometimes parents will say, oh, we tried that and it didn't work. And I think that's really the value of having somebody else besides mom or dad work on a strategy, because that may be true. Like, you can't do something, especially with kids with executive function issues and ADHD. It takes them longer to learn a skill and really internalize it. You have to do it over and over again until it just kind of becomes second nature.
Yeah.
And I love those, Kathi, for sure. So, one mom says that her 9th grader works on homework for a very, very long time, right after school up until 11 o'clock. And she said she feels like she can't do extracurriculars because it just takes so much time to get homework done.
Yeah.
Have you ever worked with a student like that?
Oh, yes. This is where we go into the whole, we need to study smarter, not harder, right? And, I talk to parents all the time that say just that. My gosh, she's up in her room for 4 hours. Now, sometimes they might be up in their room, but they're not really studying for 4 hours. So that can come into play too. So a parent might need to say, hey, leave the door open. I'm going to swoop by and see what you're doing or whatever. But it's more about effective studying. And that's something else that the coaches work with the kids all the time. Things like practice tests or distributed practice. So breaking down study sessions into pieces instead of trying to do a 2-hour block the night before the test. Again, like the note-taking strategy from the curriculum where you use a mnemonic device. So things that get the information into the head faster and more effectively than just reading through notes over and over and over. Kids can use interactive tools like quizzes or Quizlet, and those are fun and they're engaging, and they're just much more effective. And you can literally cut the time in half if the strategies are, more pointed instead of just sort of a global, I don't know what I'm doing, I'm just going to guess at something, right?
Yeah, for sure. I used to call those kids Super Bowl kids. You know how the Super Bowl's on for 4 hours, but they only play the game for an hour.
Yes.
And for some kids, they are up in their room for 4 hours, but they're really only getting about an hour of work done because of inefficiencies or, as to your point, Kathy, inefficient study strategies or distractions. All kinds of things can happen.
Yeah.
All right. So one mom says, do you have a program for high school students going to college? And actually we do. It's specific to students that are in the summer before they go off to college. We help them with these types of things. And then in the fall, we help them create a calendar and populate their syllabus for each class into their calendar. So they have everything to start out just fine. And you can contact Kathy and she can help you with that, Kalpna. All right. How do you get your child to use all the time for a task and not to rush through it? Taking time to review work, specifically at school. Jane asked that question. Kathy, what are your thoughts on reducing rushing?
Yeah, this is a tough one too, but this so tightly ties into the executive function skill piece, right? Because students with either like a neurodiverse brain, like an ADHD type of student, or just a student that's lacking executive function skills in general, impulse control is a huge issue. Self-regulation is a huge issue. So any of these practices that we can do are going to help to mitigate that need. Like, I got to get it done. I have to do it right now, right? So it makes them slow down. And then if, for example, let's say I was an English teacher, I don't even want to tell you some of the essays that I had to try to read that no one had looked at twice, barely once. So something, really effective. If we can make those steps concrete and specific, it's much easier for the student to grasp. So as a coach, they might make a checklist of things you physically have to check off. Did you do this? Did you do this? Like a rubric, but even more intensive than a rubric, because there's certain satisfaction in what did you actually get done? What did you do? And crossing those off the list, it slows them down too. And then having that list of things in front of them is a visual reminder, because some of these kids are just working so fast, they don't even see the errors or the issues. So you need to make them slow down and go back step by step. And having some kind of a template or a list can be really helpful for that.
Yeah, agreed, Kathy. Thank you for that. One parent said that her child, she finds out that things aren't going well after the fact. And even though she said, do you need any help? I'm here to help you. The student resists help, but then has overdue assignments, things are late, and she doesn't know what to do because she was available to help and the student wouldn't take her up on the help.
Yeah. So one thing real quick, if they are a little bit willing or even let you look at their learning management system, some parents like to log into Canvas or Schoology or Google Classroom and try to get a feel for that. But every day, and parents say to me, they won't let me help them. They won't let me help them. It's rare that the parent comes on and says, they can't wait for my help, right? So, and I'm a parent and I was an English teacher. Do you think either of my boys ever let me help them with their writing? So that's normal, I think. And it actually, the coaching situation it's just a different dynamic. And it's not that the parents aren't capable. Parents will say to me, I've done this. The kids are much more receptive to a third party. And I say to parents, tell your child to think of it as another adult mentor in their lives who's not mom or dad, who's not a teacher, who's not great. Well, they're teachers, but they're not your teacher. They're not grading you. They're not disciplining you. They're not judging you. And the students are just much more willing to engage in that relationship as opposed to taking it from mom or dad. And, like I said, I'm a parent. I got my feelings hurt by my own children a number of times, and then I got over it.
Kathy, I experienced the exact same thing as a parent. I know. And I would say to my kids, I do this for a living. I know what I'm doing.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
In some things, they would accept my help and some things they wouldn't. I guess that's just kind of part of being a parent for sure.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So let's see. I think we got to everything. Let me just make sure.
Sure.
What do you recommend? Karen asked, can you talk a little bit about working memory? What does access working memory mean?
Yeah. Working memory is another one of those executive function issues. Working memory is the ability to hold information in your head and be able to use it for something else. So quick example would be, you're doing a word problem in math. And in order to answer the question, you have to first do, say, a 2-digit multiplication problem. Then you have to remember that number and then use that number to complete the problem. Or you're reading a novel and you've gotten halfway through one chapter and all of a sudden you can't remember what happened in the first 6 pages, right? And now you're expected to move ahead with the rest of it. So that's where working memory can be a real problem. And it's particularly, it manifests itself in reading and math particularly. So that's when things like those mnemonic devices help. Repetition, repeated behaviors in the same way, all those things that can work to improve that. And working memory isn't really something that can be cured per se, but the coaches can come up with a number of what we call compensatory strategies so that teaching the kids what tricks and tools they can use. Like one quick example would be something we call a brain dump. So they've studied for a test and they say, 10 minutes into the test, I can't remember anything I studied. So the coach might say to the student, when you sit down and you start that test, write like crazy for 5 minutes in the margin of the test, write down everything you remember, right? And then it's there. And then you don't have to try to hold on to it while you're doing the rest of the assessment.
Right, Kathi, because that holding on and kind of cluttering your work, your frontal lobe can create a lot of anxiety. And we know through a lot of studies that when kids are feeling anxious, the ability to access your frontal lobe goes way down. And there's another part of your brain called the amygdala, which is the emotion center, that goes way up. And then your feelings like so emotional, like, oh my gosh, this is terrible. So that little strategy of a brain dump, I think, is gold. Kids really benefit for that. So thanks for sharing that.
Sure.
So I think that we're all out of questions at this point, Kathi, and we're wrapping up. Thank you so much for being my guest today and talking to our parents about executive functions in the school year and the summer. Parents, thank you so much for attending. It was a pleasure to be with you this afternoon. I look forward to seeing you again later this year. And if we can help, just reach out. Thanks so much, everybody, and have a great day. Bye now.
Everybody. Bye-bye.